we have so many things to exchange and ideas to exchange and remarks that I would suggest that we start right now. So let me first mention the speakers, including Gary. So we are happy enough to have, as usual, because it's a usual workshop, a set of speakers that is rather extraordinary, I have to say, in terms of competence, excellence, experience. And so I start. My neighbor was chairman of Seoul Financial Forum, chairman of the board of the Korea Center for International Finance. By the way, he's chairman in both cases right now. He's also a board member of a private company, Doosan Shareholding, and he was, and it's important from our standpoint, ambassador of Korea to the OECD, whilst also before holding the position of Vice Minister for the Ministry of Strategy and Finance. So thank you again for being with us. And I turn to my neighbor on the right, Pierre Jacquet, professor of economic policy at the École nationale des ponts et chaussées, member of the French Cercle des économistes, and president. He was president during 10 years of the Global Development Network, a public international organization which help strengthening the capacity of developing countries. And he was also chief economist and executive director of strategy in the French Development Agency, and I could go on. You will forgive me not pursuing Pierre. Sébastien Jean is associate director of IFRI's Geoeconomics and Geofinance Initiative, professor of economics at Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers, where he holds a very flattering chair, I have to say, Jean-Baptiste Say chair, not bad. And he's also member of the France's Council of Economic Advisors and of the National Productivity Council. André Lévy-Lang, on my left, is founder and president of the Louis Bachelier Institute, member of affiliate emeritus professor in finance at Paris-Dauphine University, is chairman of the ZECO, chairman and founder of the Fondation du Risque and Institut Louis Bachelier, as I said, and he was before CEO of Banque Paribas. So thank you very much, André, to join us again with all your competence and experience. John Lipsky, I had to introduce John Lipsky in another framework, senior fellow of the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins, acting managing director after having been deputy managing director of the IMF, and chief economist of JP Morgan and of Solomon Brothers. Again, thank you. You're really an old boy here, and we are so happy that you're here. Gary Littman, Senior Vice President of Global Initiatives at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and responsible for the Chamber's policy advocacy for economic reform of the G20 and the G7 and international financial institutions. By the way, also non-financial institutions, I understand. So thank you very much, Gary, for joining us. We are very happy to have you. And Jean-Claude Meyer, also an habitué, if I may say so, Vice Chairman International of Rothschild and Company. Before joining Rothschild, he was Managing Director of Lazare Frères, and he was previously in the French administration. So we are so happy that you're here, Mayor. Having been at the helm of two investment banks, very well known, is very flattering for our group. So if I may introduce very, very rapidly, and again, what counts is to hear the speakers, which are extraordinarily complementary and to ask all possible questions possible in order to make the best out of our meeting. The speakers are very important, but all those who are present are extremely important because you have the capacity to communicate your own vision, your own understanding of the situation. So we are supposed to address both the economic situation, global economic situation, and of course through the angle of the various positions and experience, and on finance. Being very rapid, I would say that first on the global economy, I observe that there is some kind of, before Trump, some kind of slowing down of the global economy with a difference which is quite substantial between what was foreseen by the IMF and observed by the IMF during the past and foreseen for the medium-term future. I see a difference in terms of yearly growth, which is not negligible, 0.5%. The international financial institutions, I think that there is very much an agreement between the various financial institutions, 3.2% global growth for the medium-term future, 3.7% for the past, before COVID, of course. So all that taken into account, there are reasons for that. And again, geopolitical tensions, the hedging of the very long value chain, the green transition, and until now, some disappointment in the total factor productivity, apart from the US, where perhaps the various elements to explain why we have a rather disappointing projection. But whether it will be true, whether we will observe a jump in productivity in all economies is to be seen. Until now, we have this rather, I would say, mediocre projection. I would also mention that before Trump, the international financial institutions were mentioning as possible downside risk at the global level, tariff and trade policy uncertainty. Before Trump, there was already this surge of protectionism and the hedging post-COVID, but also taking into account the geostrategic difficulties that we are observing. So we had this, of course, amplified by Trump. We had lower migration, taking into account before Trump the populism surge in practically all economies, mainly, of course, advanced economy. And that, of course, was creating a downside risk, a very important downside risk, by the way, in some countries. And it was not excluded that we could have some kind of global financial conditions tightening, mainly due perhaps to hiccups in the disinflationary process and in the monetary policy. And there was, of course, conflict escalation and materialization of the geostrategic risk also listed. I have to say that I mentioned 4 possible downside risks, and all 3 of them might be amplified by the new US administration, has to be checked, and we will discuss that. One seems to be less likely, maybe, if I stick to the rhetoric. Trump is not a war enthusiast and looks like being very dedicated to appease the zone of conflict and tensions. I don't know whether this is pure rhetoric or whether it is more serious, but clearly I cannot list conflict escalation as part of the present projection of the policy of Trump. So I will stop there. It's only to have some kind of paysage that we can, of course, have in mind. And I don't want to be much more precise. It seems to me that we have what we need. Now, if I sum up the positives and the negatives for the world economy after Trump election, I would say Positives first. Obviously, perhaps, confidence up, significant deregulation, significant corporate tax alleviation, budget expansion, abandonment of the Paris Green Deal. You can maybe see to my own rhetoric, the tune, that I am not necessarily in line with all those elements that are listed, but obviously it might appear short-term positive, short-term. Long-term positive, I would list total factor productivity push, corporate investment, financing of innovation, so going even further in the direction which is already indicated by the US, and displayed strategy to end present wars and prevent new wars, settling geostrategic difficulty. I think that that has to be listed as a long-term positive. Now, short-term negative, higher tariffs and trade barriers, higher inflation, higher level of real and nominal interest rates as a consequence, perhaps less immigration, massively less immigration, that will have a negative impact short-term, and trade wars, perhaps not only with China and with Europe, but also with the friends in Mexico and Canada. That obviously has to be listed in the short-term negatives, in my opinion. And long-term negative on growth would be abandonment of the Paris Green Deal in the long term, uncertainty on the result of each transactional negotiation, and unpredictability in general, which is something that might crystallize in a much more predictable, I would say, attitude after a while. Uncontrollable public debt outstanding in the US, whatever the new Minister of Finance is saying, the 3%, I don't take it for granted. And I already mentioned, of course, as a negative long-term perspective on growth, less immigration. But as you see, I think we have to be balanced and not stick to only one or the other attitude as regards the possibility of having an economy which would be, I would say, entirely negative or entirely positive. Now, on finance, I would be briefer, because it seems to me that what counts is what you think yourself. I would say that to the extent that I see also elements that are a little bit worrying, I only mentioned that en passant. We have a level of overall outstanding debt, public debt, which is higher today than it was the case before Lehman Brothers. So we have to take that into account. We have an indicator, which was considered an important indicator at the moment of the explosion of the great financial crisis. And it was not the only cause of the financial crisis. We had a number of other causes, and particularly the weakness of the prudentials in general, banks prudential, and also benign neglect as regards all the financial sector. But nevertheless, the debt outstanding, the level of leverage, mainly in the public sector, but also in the private sector, is an element which is really alarming, in my opinion. Particularly true in the advanced economy, which were already over-indebted. Very true as regards the US, for instance, but also Japan, also a number of European countries. Not to speak of the emerging world, because the emerging world itself had a jump in overall public debt outstanding. So they are on a way to catch up with the level of the advanced economy. So all this has to be kept in mind, in my opinion, as element of with a prudence and caution as regards the overall debt outstanding and the overall stability of the financial sphere. I mentioned on the other side of the equation the fact that the Financial Stability Board has been quite active in having new prudentials. For the banks, it seems to me that we can really consider that the banks are in a much more stable position, provided, of course, the rules are respected. We could have the experience of the regional banks in the US demonstrating that if you don't go by the rule, you can be very vulnerable, and it was the case. So again, this is an element which is repeated each time in the letters which are sent by the Financial Stability Board to the G20 and to the financial institutions, at least to all responsible. Go by the rule, respect the rule, otherwise we are all in a weaker situation. By the way, it was not a miracle if we had simultaneously the regional banks exploding in the US and Credit Suisse exploding in Switzerland. The rapidity of the reaction and the boldness of the reaction of the authorities was incredible, frankly speaking, in comparison with what was foreseen theoretically in such cases. And we could avoid, of course, contagion. But it called for extremely rapid, extraordinarily bold decisions taken by the Fed, by the Treasury, by the Swiss authorities. And it would be naive to think that we could always count on public authorities reacting so, I would say, authoritatively and so rapidly. So I mentioned also that. Now, we have a large number of other elements that are all listed by the international community, and we will discuss that, which were discussed here, of course, artificial intelligence, pros and cons, positives and negatives, and, of course, the usual suspect in the eyes of the international community in terms of preserving financial stability are always the negative more than the positive, but we should not forget the positive. It was very well done here, I have to say. We had a concentration on artificial intelligence of panels that was very, very telling. We have the cyber attacks, which are part of the real danger, enormous danger, by the way, in the present situation. And we have all the, I would say, difficulty or not that are associated with green finance and the green transition, where also in that domain we have positives and negatives, positive being the new international Standard Board that is supposed to recommend a number of attitude in the private sector that would permit to avoid major difficulties. But all this is very complex. It's a very complex set of positives and negatives. And one provisional conclusion is that we have to be extraordinarily prudent, cautious, and certainly not practicing benign neglect in the present circumstances. Now I stop there, and I will follow, if you agree, the alphabetic order in order to have a full picture. Each of us has exactly 5-6 minutes, and we will then engage in this very vibrant discussion, which is usual in this format.